This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on your smart speaker.
Claudia-Liza on Talk Radio.
Okay, let's take a look at tomorrow morning's front pages, shall we? We've been talking today on the programme about the potential of more restrictions over COVID, as we are seeing the highest numbers of new cases in the world, and also an increase in the number of people dying with COVID-19, the highest numbers since March. Could there be restrictions on the horizon? Well, the Daily Express is saying that actually the best way to combat that is by making sure we have a full rollout of a booster jab. Let's bring in Bill Bowkett, who's a political commentator, looking through tomorrow morning's front pages. Good evening to you, Bill.
Very good evening.
Yeah, let's start with the Daily Express. They're pushing a booster jab.
Yes, they are. The problem that the government have at the moment is that there's been such a low uptake of the booster jabs so far, particularly among the elderly. I think it's something only around a third of elderly patients who are usually or are the most vulnerable group in society have failed to take up a vaccine. And part of that could be down to communication. Yeah. Part of that could also be down to a fear of the booster, because we still don't know the health implications. But it is a worry for the government, because they promised that every elderly person would be offered a booster jab by the start of November. And since only a third have taken up the vaccine, and they want the program to be wrapped up by Christmas, it seems rather concerning.
Yeah, I mean, going back on your point on communication, I haven't really heard much about getting that third booster jab. And in fact, it was only today when reading all the headlines and reading about the numbers of people who haven't been taking the jab, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to make sure my mum gets the third booster jab. I hadn't even thought of it. But what the government is saying they're going to do now is change that communication, just give it the same kind of priority, make sure the communication's getting out there in the same way it was when it came to getting the first jab.
Yeah, definitely. There's also been some recommendations as well as how to improve the current precarious situation. Matt Hancock, of course, led the country as health secretary during the pandemic, only to dramatically resign. He says that there should be more pop-ups in order to offer the booster jab. But that would also be a hard reliance on the voluntary sector, who have pulled lots of people during the pandemic. But as we're seeing at the moment, there is a big worry with not only the declining protection of the current vaccines, people that have had 2 doses waiting after 6 months, but you now have this new variant of the Delta variant. So that's also a concern as well.
I don't know about you, Bill, but I'm struggling to keep up with all the variants. So the Daily Mail's continue to focus on that huge green strategy. Their headlines, Boris's £1 trillion green gamble, saying that, the Prime Minister is really gambling with its initiative on trying to get us to zero carbon emissions.
Yes, it's been a very policy-heavy day, I must say, trying to follow all of the different announcements. But it's logical, because we have COP26 coming up in just over 2 weeks' time. So some of the policies that have been announced today include, well, there was the big one of the replacement of heater boilers from gas. We've also seen that there's going to be investment in a new nuclear power station, investment in electric vehicles, investment in charging points as well. Of course, this is going to come at a dramatic cost, and there's even rumours that in order to reach net zero by 2050, that invariably taxes will have to rise, at least in the short term, as well as the current struggles that we have with the NHS, and also the £2 trillion worth of debt that the country is suffering at the moment.
Yeah, this is dominating much of the newspapers tomorrow morning. Actually, The Guardian also leading with the same story. UK's net zero plans fall short on ambition and funds, just getting the response of critics there and experts, they say.
Yeah, so they have a quote there from Professor Kevin Anderson from the University of Manchester. He's a professor specifically in energy. Quote, it's the story.
Oh, Bill, we're losing you, Bill.
And there's been other
you're
criticisms.
Back. Go on, Bill. What was he saying? Just repeat that.
There's also other. Well, there's obviously the quote at the front from Kevin Anderson, the Manchester professor, about how it's a piecemeal policies. But there have also been other criticisms as well, particularly from the campaign group Friends of the Earth, where they criticise it as being a pick and mix announcement by Boris Johnson, particularly when it comes to these electric boilers, even though that there has been designated £450 million. If you look at how many households there are in Britain, roughly 27 million, according to the most recent ONS statistics, and that will only pay for about 90,000 homes. So a lot of questions about what Boris Johnson has announced, but we'll have to see what else he's going to reveal in the next few weeks in the run up to COP26.
Yeah, and the picture featured on The Guardian is of Michael Gove. He was targeted yesterday by anti-lockdown protesters, and had to have the police come out to shield him. Moving to The Independent, yes, again another focus on Boris Johnson's green initiative, but also looking at what needs to be done to potentially just shield us off from any potential restrictions, any lockdowns. And this could be found in the development of I say new vaccine, but actually it's a vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine +1.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I just find it, I mean, just looking back at the vaccine rollout, just how unbelievable it was that, you had the same Dame Sarah Gilbert and the Oxford team managing to get this vaccine done in such a quick amount of time. Normally vaccines would take about 9-10 years, and managed to get it out in months. And now what you're seeing is that you've got this modified version to combat the Delta variant, which seems appropriate now, given the fact that there are rising infections. We're seeing an increase in deaths, with, as I mentioned, waning protection from the current doses of the coronavirus vaccines. So, it's positive note, I must say.
COVID-19, the main story on the eye as well. Look, I don't know how to take this, Ben. Scientists are meeting once a month. They're increasing their meetings as COVID-19 cases rise. They are very worried that we could see a winter wave.
I can kind of understand why, and it's a brilliant scoop actually by Jay Merrick of the Eye. I can kind of understand why the scientists wouldn't be meeting up as frequently, given the fact that over 80% of the country now have had at least one dose, and also the fact that with restrictions ending, and it's been a tough 18 months for the scientists as well, having to advise the government on almost an hourly basis, given the developments. But now it almost seems like a good case for them to meet more often, as we mentioned, with the rise in hospitalizations and deaths and cases. But there is a tension within the cabinet, and there has been, but it's kind of escalating now. And that now, since we're out of lockdown, why do the scientists have to be intervening even further on this matter? And the government say that they do not want to reintroduce its Plan B, mandatory face coverings again, vaccine passports. Remember also, just today, the Coronavirus Act has been extended for another 6 months. So the government now have legitimacy to reintroduce these measures if they wanted to.
Going to the Times, they're focusing on the death of Sir David Amess. We won't go into too much detail here, Ben, but the MI5 are saying that they want to have more control over Prevent, targeting teachers and faith leaders, saying that they're too soft on suspected radicals.
Yeah, and it seems that they're trying to take a tougher line on this matter because of how badly it's been with the tragic death of Sir David Amess. Obviously, we saw yesterday the tributes, and Mark Francois also calling for a strengthening of the.
Mark Francois' tribute was just amazing. It was,
Trolls.
Oh, Ben, are you still there?
Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah,
yes,
just
but it was
funny,
funny,
moving,
but
tragic,
it was
heartfelt.
poignant.
Yeah.
All the above, as any elected official should be. But it seems that the government are going down this harder line on law and order, both Raab, trying to toughen up terror sentences, trying to strengthen, prevent, and Patel has been very vocal about the matter as well. I feel that at the moment, the solutions which have been labelled, I think we're kind of stuck a little bit in this chasm with Sir David's passing, where we're suddenly talking about, okay, what would Sir David have wanted if he was, if he were alive? So I think we just need to be a bit more reflective and take a more rational approach. And maybe that might be to strengthen counter-terrorism laws. It might just have to be to look at the current assessments when it comes to the police and prevent. But we need a bit more time to think about the solutions that need to be done to make sure an incident like this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, well, the Mirror, its headline, its front page, it seems to be pointing to online hate. It's saying hate cleric rants still poisoning minds on the web. So yeah, they're focused on making sure that there's material on the web that can't be seen by people who could be potentially easily impressionable.
Yeah, the one problem with that, though, is that the libertarian end of the Conservative Party would not want something like this to happen, because they would see it as a prohibition on free speech and the government intervening on this matter. But at the same time, social media, big tech companies like Facebook and Twitter do have a certain level of responsibility when it comes to matters like these. And there was a very good article actually in Spite, which talked about the fact that actually it wasn't because of Twitter as a reason why Sir David has passed away. As I mentioned, I feel like we're stuck in this emotional roller coaster at the moment about the solutions, and we can just solely blame it on radicalization online because of these social media platforms. So yeah, we need to step back a moment and maybe look more at the criminal justice system before going for the likes of the big social media companies.
Let's take a look at the Metro's front page, shall we? We've spoken about the countdown to net zero. I've got another paper going to speak a bit more on that. Let's focus on Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, meeting Anton Deck, talking to them about mental health and Ant McPartlin talking quite openly about the issues that he's faced with that, particularly with addiction.
Yeah, definitely. The Sun newspaper, I remember seeing all those front pages of, how distraught Ant was after, stepping back from television duties from the public limelight, but now seeing how much of a good stage he's in at life now. He's married, he's back on television. You saw him at the Newcastle United game on the weekend as well, albeit he probably was disappointed about his team's loss despite its new Saudi ownership. But as we've seen, Kate Middleton talking to Anton Deck about the matter, and the Royals, especially William and Kate, have taken such brand issue and campaigning for, openness about mental health. I remember watching a very good episode of Peter Crouch's podcast on BBC Sounds, and how Prince William was there and had such an open and frank conversation about mental health. So maybe, as we've seen, they've been intervening on the matters of environment and climate change. While that is important, I would rather see them focus solely, if that's my preference, on then tackling mental health.
Okay, Bill, stick with us. We're going to talk about more of the front pages in tomorrow morning's papers, including the Queen saying actually she's too young for an oldie gong. You're listening to Claudia-Liza Vanderpuije on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
We've been going over tomorrow morning's papers with Bill Bowkett, political commentator. He's still with me now. And Bill, tonight I've been talking about the green strategy that was announced by Boris Johnson. So much to go through. Hasn't been getting a lot of love, but has had a lot of criticism, and it seems to be dominating tomorrow morning's front pages, including the Daily Telegraph, pointing out that the boiler vouchers will help just 90,000 homes switch from gas to that the energy, the low carbon emission electric pumps, it's just not going to be enough, is it?
No, it's not. And actually, when they do get implemented, installed, the costs are actually going to be much higher than expected, plainly because of there's several factors that are in play. One of them being because the shares among oil is going to be down as a result. So that's going to damage the economy in various different ways as well. And there's kind of an early indication with this policy about perhaps what the measures that Rishi Sunak are going to be introducing in the budget. If taxes will have to rise, which at this rate kind of seem inevitable, then that might have to be the case. And I was there at a party conference watching Rishi Sunak speak and kind of making the case for a Conservative Party that kind of preserves taxes in order to promote business, but also to help ordinary working people.
It seems like the Prime Minister's really hoping for, I don't know, it's the innovators, right? That hopefully the technology will eventually come to allow more people to install these new kinds of electric pumps. But is that enough? Is it right for the Prime Minister to just bet and gamble, as it was said on another front page, bet and hope that hopefully the technology will be there one day?
Well, the technology is there. It might be there in the future. There are, interestingly, other solutions that could be for the replacement of gas boilers. And one of them, interestingly, is nuclear.
Yes.
We saw I think 140 million pounds for this new nuclear power station, but any excess could be used directly for the mainland in order to heat homes, especially during the winter. And then that would mean that for more coastal rural towns, then they can be wholly reliant on things like solar panels and also turbines as well. So there are alternatives, and that those need to be explored. But it seems that the government are thinking that the obvious solution going forward in order to reach net zero and to reduce our climate footprint is electric heaters.
Well, on the Financial Times, again, focus on its front page on the government's green strategy, this time focusing, though, on how this could impact businesses. Its headline, new taxes needed to pay for net zero transition as £37 billion car levies shrink.
Yeah, the car levy is shrinking, as I said, that is one factor. And it's because of the tax vacuum, it says in the piece, I think it's equivalent to something like 1.5% of GDP. And whilst the carbon tax is there, it simply won't be enough. And we always knew that with any green strategy in order to reach net zero, it was going to be expensive. Maybe not the Green New Deal, which many on the left were advocating, but expensive nonetheless. And one of the solutions could be borrowing. But if that were to happen, that would hurt generations. It's already kind of hurting my generation in many ways. As I mentioned, £2 trillion worth of debt at the moment, purely because of the pandemic, but as we are also seeing with the supply crisis and also the need to reach net zero. So if that were to happen, there would be a rise in inflation, but the Treasury have ruled out further borrowing. But then that leads us back to the question again, and I don't want to use the T word constantly, but taxes. It seems that may be the only way in order to raise these funds.
So do you think this is going to be enough to grab voters? And will it be enough even for the COP26 meeting just 2 weeks away? And of course, this is all designed to come out to be announced ahead of that.
Well, Boris Johnson, as we saw with his speech to the United Nations just last month, he was kind of projecting himself as a global leader and one of the, along with President Joe Biden in the United States, fronting the delivery in order to tackle climate change. But while the overwhelming majority of the public do believe that climate change is an existential force, ultimately, if these policies were to be introduced, for instance, electric cars, which are, much more expensive in the long run to run and also to buy, as well as these electric boilers, that could hurt ordinary working voters. And there's other polls as well showing actually how unpopular Green policies are in red wall seats, which Boris Johnson won during the 2019 general election, and he says it's been loaned out. But there has to be measures of some sort in order to deal with the current existential crisis.
And Bill, at the Daily Star, why is the Queen unhappy with receiving a particular award?
Well, she was offered Oldie of the Year by Oldie magazine, a very good magazine, actually. That's one of the only ones that sold them my newsagents.
You're too young to even know what that magazine is, surely.
I know, but it's a fabulous magazine, and I tend to pick up whatever is on the newsagents, try different things out. But anyway, and the Queen has declined, unfortunately, Oldie of the Year because she says that she is too young at 95 years of age. And even though we are seeing, the Queen now in public displays with a walking stick, she still looks great, and she's, still doing all these public duties. Interestingly, actually, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, had won it, I think, in 2011 or 2010. I can't remember which year. But
he would have been younger.
Declined.
He would have been younger than the Queen, isn't it?
Yes, he would have. I think at the time he would have been, because he died age 99, so he would have been. Yeah, I think he would have been maybe just to turn 90. But the winner instead has gone to not the Queen, but Sonko Carr, and the Hollywood star,
yes.
been in films like Gigi.
Gigi, yes, indeed.
Worthy.
Okay, Bill, I think we probably just should end it there. Bill Bowkett, thank you so much for going through the front pages with us. We just about managed to have him for all of that. You are listening to Claudia-Liza Vanderpuije on talkRADIO. Going to be